My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Well, Jesus, maybe as part of the prayer of asking for pardon for our sins, we should ask you particularly to forgive us for the moments whenever we are foolish and whenever we are led astray by our own thoughts, whenever the path that we go down in our interior thought takes us away from you. And conversely, we could say thanks to you for your patience. Because no matter how much we mess up and walk away and are stupid, you're so patient with us, so tender, and offering us always the chance to come back. Now we see this beautifully in the gospel for today. So Jesus, you're making your way through Galilee with your disciples, telling them something which they need to hear about your impending death and resurrection, that you're going to suffer and die for us. But we learn a little bit later that they've not really grasped that or understood that. I mean, they couldn't have seen that coming. And so maybe we can give the disciples a bit of a bye-ball in that sense, that they didn't understand this, because even though you're trying to tell them very seriously, Jesus, about these kind of great mysteries of salvation, it's not on the radar, so to speak. But we hear a little bit later on in the gospel that whenever you come to the house, that they were arguing about something on the way. What could they possibly have been discussing? It certainly was not the death and resurrection of the Lord. They were arguing amongst themselves which one was the greatest. Now, this image of the gospel today presents us beautifully with the clash between human nature, weak as it is, and the divine patience, your loving fortitude for us, Jesus, to get us back on track. Because rather than talking about matters of salvation, or to be quite frank, anything important, they were arguing very deeply, intently, discussing, that's kind of the sense of what it tells us in Mark's Gospel in the original Greek, which one was the greatest. And whenever you ask them, Jesus, what were you arguing about on the road, they were stunned into silence. And I kind of like this, because in that moment they kind of realize how stupid they've been, or they know that they can't just come out and say, well, actually, Jesus, we were arguing about which one of us was the greatest. Because in your presence, the presence of the Great One, the Almighty, even if they didn't understand everything about salvation, or that even at that moment that you had come as Lord to save us from our sins, they knew that you truly were the Great One. And so they're stunned into silence because they're in the presence of one who humbles them. And they can't say we were arguing about which one of us was the greatest, because it just seems so ridiculous. Now, I like the humanity of the discussion of the disciples, also because I think we can relate to this quite well, because often we kind of get trapped in these kind of thoughts ourselves, that which one of us is the greatest. We mightn't overtly say it, but you look at somebody, in your workplace, and you think, I could do that job better than they can. Or they're not very good at this, or I don't like the way they've raised their kids, or I'm far better at football than they are. We have all these kind of little mini competitions that go on all of the time in our head, and sometimes it spills out of our head into others, and we take the competition to another level. Really, because we're trying to be the great one. We're trying to be the one who gets ahead or gets an advantage on somebody else. So just one side of it that we can relate to pretty well. I don't know about you, but I've wasted so much time of my life on these kind of interior monologues. And Jesus, if anything, I wish that I could speak to you as deeply and profoundly as sometimes I speak to myself in my head. We can get so caught up in these kind of interior dialogues that we're imagining with other people. I'm just going to walk in there, and I'm just going to say to him, and if he says this to me, then I'm just going to counter with this. And before we know it, we've kind of wasted so much of our time in plotting out a conversation or a fight or a debate that's completely fantastical. And that's not a kick in the teeth away from arguing which one of us is the greatest. We waste so much time going deep within ourselves and trying to come up with these kind of fantasy conversations than A, if we opened up our heart in prayer, or B, if we just sometimes spoke to other people. We get so caught up in these kind of little competitions or these imaginings about what they're going to say and what I'm going to say in response that we're really just wasting time. And so I can see in the kind of this journey of the disciples, especially whenever they're in the house and they're kind of stunned into silence, because we've all fallen into that trap at least once, if not at least once a day. And it can come especially in our prayer time. We're trying to pray, and yet we kind of get lost in our thoughts. We're kind of led off track into something completely else, completely foreign to the intention that we'd set out with, to be with you, Jesus. And so again, we see your patience with us, dragging us back on course. So help us get the intention right, I suppose, whenever we're going for prayer, that we're not going to lose it quickly by falling down into some other kind of conversational path in our head, or that instead of really praying, we just end up talking to ourselves. This whole kind of falling into these little traps of which one of us is the greatest can happen in those kind of small ways, like we've just been thinking about. But also in the history of the church, it has led to absolute disasters. There was a period in the early 13th century, in 1204 to be quite precise, whenever the Pope called for the Fourth Crusade. Now, the background to this was that the Pope and the Latin Christians especially wanted to recapture the city of Jerusalem for Christianity, because it had fallen to Muslim control, and since the holy places were being desecrated, or that the Christian people were not being treated well, this was the mentality at the time, that they had to fight to regain control of the Holy Land and to cast out the enemy. And so a great army was drawn together, that they would go to Jerusalem and that they would capture it back for Catholicism, for the glory of God. But they got caught up along the way. And these crusaders, who certainly were not doing it for, all of them in any case, doing it for pure spiritual motives, they decided to take some detours. And on their way to Jerusalem, they stopped in Constantinople, a great capital of the Christian East. And there they sacked that city in 1204. They put many people to the sword, and they destroyed many beautiful Orthodox churches, simply because they were kind of a different creed. Even though they were Orthodox brothers and sisters, they just couldn't accept this difference. And so if we kind of look at this situation from this kind of little walk along the shores of Galilee, arguing which one is the greatest, this is whenever this kind of fight about which one of the greatest becomes an absolute nightmare, and is so far away from putting you, Jesus, at the center. Now, this kind of fight that took place over this city has led to divisions between Orthodox Christians and Catholics even to this day, and had a massive impact upon the Christian governance, let's say, of that part of the world. So, I mean, we're not going to fight a crusade anytime soon, but we should fight a crusade to put you at the center, Jesus, and that we would cease to have these little petty arguments amongst ourselves about which one is the greatest. We should be silenced like the disciples in your presence, the presence of greatness. And may that silence also reach into our hearts, an interior silence, to silence all of those little interior monologues that will really speak to you, Jesus, and listen to you. That will put you at the center, you who are the greatest. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions affections, and inspirations that you have communicated to me during this meditation. I ask your help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.